Hi, everyone, and welcome to Read This Now, the weekly webcast where Brad Gustafson and I share two books that we love and we think you should read when, Brad?
That is what we do, and we also suggest people read them immediately.
Immediately, as in right
Right
now.
now, yeah.
Our three or so regular viewers of this show know that we take a lot of pride in the fact that we never ever plan it. But this week,
Yeah.
we decided it was actually pretty important that we be intentional about the books that we share. If you are a regular viewer of the show, then you know we've skipped the last couple of weeks. And this was mostly because, like all of you, I'm sure, Brad and I have been doing a lot of listening and, trying to make sense of what's happening in the world. And because Brad and I both so strongly believe that books and literacy are a powerful tool for helping the young people we serve do those same things, we wanted to use this show to try to help with that a little bit.
That's right. Yeah, you said that so well, Jen.
It's almost like we planned it.
Well, true, and this might be a show first. Like I got nothing to add there. Other than Jen, regardless of the role that you're serving kids in, I think this episode will have something to offer you that's important personally and for the world and to help the kiddos that you serve. So you're right. We took this week really serious. Not that we don't take other weeks seriously, but I think I speak for us both. We're excited. We think this can make a difference, and it's important.
Yeah. The goal of this show, we joke about how we just sort of fly by the seat of our pants,
Yeah.
but the goal has always just been about modeling reading for joy and sharing that joy with your colleagues in ways that are no stress or no pressure. But with the state of the world and with people trying to figure out ways how to make sense of complicated and complex issues, we felt like we had an obligation and an opportunity to use our few minutes on the internet to help with that, especially for
Right.
all of us who serve kids. So
Right.
with
And
that,
so complicated issues being racism and systems that need dismantling and awareness and just lots of different things. But we're going to try to probably do this in our regular kind of sort of showtime, right? This isn't a 3-hour special or anything. It's just a
right.
different approach for the standard Read This Now.
Exactly. So we wanted to share, in addition to several books that we think are wonderful, we wanted to share a way that you can be really intentional about crafting literacy resources for young people that help them reach an understanding of these sort of complex topics like racism and oppression and the dismantling of systems that allow them to happen. Right now, whether you're watching this show on the day that we produce it or you're watching it a year from now, you will, I'm sure, be aware of the Black Lives Matter movement and the turmoil that has been unfolding in the United States over the last several weeks as people fight for equality. Those issues can be complicated for young people. Shoot, those issues can be complicated for adults. And so we wanted to show a strategy that can help you gather and curate books for young people to help them understand those complex issues. So I'm going to share my screen, Brad, if that's okay with you.
And wait.
And let's see if I can do this and be really, really professional. There we go. And so can you share, do you see my screen now, Brad?
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
Excellent. We wanted to share the concept of a book ladder. And before I go any further, I want to make sure people understand that book ladders are not our ideas. We're just big fans of them. They are actually the brainchild of Teri Lesesne, who is an educator out of Texas. And she wrote an entire book on book ladders called Reading Ladders. Here we go, right here, and by Teri Lesesne. And it has been a go-to resource for me for a very long time. And so this moment in time seemed like a really good opportunity to share the concept of a reading ladder and how you might use it right now in this moment to help kids understand some of the issues that we're facing as humans. And you could use this for any issue, but the one that we're sharing right now is to help use books to help kids understand the Black Lives Matter movement. So
Right.
go ahead, Brad, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, Jen, we're both going to climb the ladder here with you, but Jen is going to book talk a couple of the books on the ladder. And then I have a couple that I've read the last week or two, and we'll
Yes.
maybe talk about how we would even place them on the ladder.
Right. So if you were creating a reading ladder for a specific kiddo in your life, then the way that Dr. Lesesne recommends that you do that is you think about two specific books. One book that the kid already loves and it's very accessible to them. So that's like the first step on their ladder.
Can you
And
scroll
then,
down, Jen, or
yes,
don't you want? Okay.
I will. I'm going to go through this in a minute. But if
Yep.
you were creating this for a specific kid, you would start with the book that is on the rung that the kid could already reach. Then you think about the book that you would want on the top rung, which is the one that represents the most complex and rich understanding of that topic. And then, as the person who understands books and literacy, you then build the rungs in between. Here's where the kiddo begins. Here's where you want them to get, and you use books to help them to act as rungs in between. So the book ladder that we're sharing today wasn't created for a specific kid, but rather it was created with those top books in mind. At the top of this ladder, I've put two books that I think represent some of the best, most robust, and complex text to help kiddos understand the issues that we're facing right now. One of them is All American Boys by Jason Reynolds, and the other is On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. And you can see within that rung, I've also added some other options for that rung right there. But if your kiddos aren't ready, or even maybe some of the adults that you work with aren't quite ready for that rung, then you can scroll down the ladder and find the rung that your reader is ready for. And that's where they begin. So as Brad mentioned, and then I promise I am going to let Brad talk here for a minute, but I wanted to just quickly share a few of the books on this ladder that I love so much. I've read
Hey, Jen,
every book. Go ahead.
before we start climbing, I'll just say when you and I connected last week, kind of as part of our pre-planning and conversation, I feel, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down a little bit more, please. I recall that Ghost Boys and New Kid and the books under it were kind of the first. That was where your ladder started last week. And I said, I humbly asked, geez, I wonder if some ages or maybe even communities aren't like, that's a high. What if that feels like a high starting point for them? And then I think you added some more. So it's interesting, like different ladders in the world can climb different walls, but all ladders aren't. Some people, ultimately, we all maybe need and want to get them on the right ladder, but
Mm-hmm.
just having a ladder that's personalized so that they can reach that initial rung, and that's the only way to start moving up.
That's right. So, for example, like that brings up a great point, Brad, because let's say for your kiddos or for the kiddos that somebody watching this might be working with in their school or at home, let's take Jewel Parker Rowland's Ghost Boys. Maybe that is the top rung that you're hoping your kiddos will get to. You're not concerned with these upper rungs here that I have put on there, but for your kiddos, this is the right spot that you'd like to get them prepared for that book. But even these picture books that I've included at the bottom might be a little bit robust or a stretch. Dr. Lesesne talks about building step stools within the rungs of ladders. So if the space between those two rungs is a little bit too wide for your specific kiddo, then you build some step stools in between to help them get to it, which might be some short stories or a smaller text or a video that they watch that helps them build some background knowledge, whatever it takes to help them reach that next rung. So this ladder is for a general audience, but if you're building it for a specific class or a specific kid, then those rungs are going to be based on their unique needs and might have lots of different step stools in between. Does that make sense?
That's great. Yep.
Okay, so I just want to share a few of the books on the ladder. I've read all of them on here, and some of them I have shared on this program before, but I wanted to share the ones that I had handy as just a repeat and to give everyone an opportunity to get to know at least a couple of the books from every rung. And I'm going to start back up at the top. I do want to share All American Boys by Jason Reynolds, because this was one of the very first books I ever read. And I should also make sure I mention his co-author. I'm sorry, I said only Jason Reynolds, but it was written by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Kiley. And it was one of the very first books I ever read that dealt with the concept of Black Lives Matter, of fear of police, and how in communities of color, the police are not necessarily always seen as a protection, but rather as a unit to be afraid of. And this particular book is very interesting because it's about two high school friends. One is white and one is black, and they experience the black boy experiences an interaction with the police that turns violent, and his white friend turns out to be the brother of the cop who was involved. And so it's how the two of them experience this one event very, very differently. And it's just incredibly unique. And you can see all the stickers that are on the front. It's the first book I ever read like this, and it still remains to me a classic. So that's All American Boys. If you go down the ladder on this rung, I actually tried to include some nonfiction informational texts that I thought might help to inform understanding of these top books, like maybe some information about laws and history would be helpful to kiddos before they got to that top rung. And so, of course, I want to include the book Stamped, but which is also by Jason Reynolds, but with Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote the adult nonfiction version of this book. This book has been getting a lot of attention recently, and well deserved so. And it really just unpacks the history of racism in this country to help kiddos understand why certain communities in this book might be fearful of government systems like the police. So that's that rung. But when we get down to this rung, then these books are a little bit more accessible and actually deal more with the interpersonal interactions that might make people of color fearful of government systems in their communities. And the book I wanted to share really quickly related to that was New Kid by Jerry Craft, which won the Newbery last year, and is this wonderful story of a kiddo who goes to school at a place where he doesn't look like any of the other kids in his school. And this book, better than any other I have ever seen for young people, illustrates how kids of color have to code switch when they speak to people who are not of their same race, how they have to change the way they look. Even on the subway ride from his home to his school, he has to go from, in his words, trying to look scary so he won't be hassled by kids in his neighborhood, to trying to look not scary so he will not frighten the people who aren't in his neighborhood, and all of the work that goes into just being alive in order to accommodate all of the people who may judge him because of his race. So that is a wonderful book. And then on the last rung, I wanted to share The Voice of Freedom by Fannie Lou Hamer, which the Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer, which is a picture book biography of the civil rights movement as told through the eyes of a Black female activist who doesn't get, I don't think, as much recognition for her work in trying to create an equal society. And it's by Carol Boston Weatherford, and it's just so beautifully done. It's, again, you can see all of the stickers that are on the front of it, but those picture book biographies, especially when they're written by own voice authors, can help be a lower rung on those ladders to help kiddos understand the history around a world that treats some people differently than others. So that's the concept of a book ladder, and we wanted to show that to you all. And then Brad wanted to add a couple of books to the ladder.
Yeah, right. And I was just kind of making some connections to what an important conversation experience this could be, or creating a ladder with colleagues and just talking about what they're reading um, and doing that. I don't know, that I think that could potentially be really a powerful experience. But we're going to do that right now. The last two books I read, Jen. So this is Child of a Dream by Sharon Robinson. So her dad Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball. And this novel feels really good, because a lot of times when I think of athletic heroes, you think they're on this pedestal and you could never, they put their socks and shoes on one at a time, just like we do. It was really cool to see how he made her pancakes at home on the weekend. It just all these things were that just brought this amazing person and historical figure too, but champion for equity and all these things. It just brought it down to a level that was just amazing to read about. And she tells the story really well, lots and lots of dialogue. So this is the first book to put on the ladder. And I would based on, I haven't read all of these books, but quite a few of them. But from what I know about Ghost Boys, I would probably, and Undefeated, I would probably put this in between those two.
Yeah.
Yep. I think the publisher recommends 3rd grade and up. I was kind of thinking 4th grade. Yeah, I'm not even sure why. There's a French kiss in here, or kind of sort of a French kiss. And to me, that automatically puts it like high school, but I know
I'm so
that's
proud
probably...
of you, Brad, because there was a time where that would have been college reading material. That would have alone.
Right. Yep.
I'm super proud of you.
Yeah.
I
But
know,
really
you're doing
wonderful,
great.
like not just for your 4th graders, but for you, for people listening, and for me, like really, really powerful. So then after I read this, I got so interested in, quite honestly, a lot of the history. And like this book talked about Sharon marching with her dad and Martin Luther King. And I wanted to learn more. So I went to this on my bookshelf. I've never read it. And this is
Oh,
Dark Sky
yeah.
Rising, Reconstruction and the Dawn of Jim Crow by Henry Louis Gates Jr. And I am probably like 70% done with this. And it is just basically a historical record, but it's the history that I never learned or heard about in school. And it is heartbreaking, but it feels a lot more comprehensive. It's a story that we were kind of robbed of, because I think we would all care and not be okay with what's happening here. And I think we would probably all look at things a lot differently if we had been aware and taught. So I would, we've recommended a lot of books on this show, Jen. And I give this my highest recommendation I can possibly give. And again, I'm only 60% done, but this is the book I needed to read 20 years ago, or more. Right. And again, it's heartbreaking. There are parts where, I don't have words, but it's like a factual account of the history of this country and people who were enslaved and how they experienced that. Like not everyone sees things the same. And some people, Jen, earlier, because I've talked to them, will say like what we're talking about here is political, and there's not a place for it in school. And again, I've heard that, but to assume that every single kiddo in this country has had the same experience with law enforcement, or should feel exactly you, I don't think that's a fair statement. I think it's just humanizing that people have different emotions and experiences, right? And that comes up even in this, when Sharon Robinson is detailing seeing kids who were peacefully protesting getting hosed down and worse. Can we not blame them for having certain feelings about that experience? So I get that this is complex, and I'm still doing way more listening and reading than talking about it, but it is important, I feel, to talk about this and raise awareness so that we can look at systems and make sure they're not still in place. Like one of the things that's becoming increasingly clear as I read this, some people also, Jen, will say that there is no such thing anymore as systemic racism. Again, how would I know that? Because people have told me that, right? And then, so then my question is, as I've been reading this, is okay, so when did that stop being a thing then? When did it
Right.
stop? Because year after year, decade after decade, it's in this book, and it's just factual historical accounts. And there, a lot of what they're talking about, Jen, it feels strangely and horrifically and tragically familiar. Like you
Right.
could change, like there were a couple of quotes I debated even reading. You could just change the year, Jen, and we might
Mm-hmm.
have thought it was yesterday's headline.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where would I put this? Oh my
I'm
gosh.
scrolling up because I already know.
Yeah. You know, it's a really interesting thing though. Is it Carolyn Lesesne or whoever invented
Teri
Teri
Lesesne. Teri
Lesesne? Did
Lesesne.
she have like fire poles or escalators on her ladder? Because I feel like this almost could be
Yeah.
parallel. Maybe not every single thing in here, because there's lots of content that wouldn't be pair well with a picture book, but a lot of it would. So I think there are
Right.
elements and parts, but to be
That's the
sure, just
thing.
adults who are listening, you really, really, really need to read this now.
I've read that book, and I'd forgotten all about it. So I'm really glad that you brought it back up, because it is an important accounting of history that is not taught in school in the majority way. So while you might get a week on something related to Jim Crow during Black History Month, it is not taught within the context of the totality of history of this nation. And so I got the same feeling you did reading that, and also reading the book, Lifting as We Climb, which I book talked a few weeks ago here on Read This Now, which was a history of the women's suffrage movement, but being told through the perspective of Black women who fought for women's suffrage, alongside white women who literally said things like, I'll cut off my own arm before I support Black people having the vote. And yet Black people still fought to get women the vote in this country. And even though that feels like a long time ago in the history of the world and in the history of our nation, it really isn't that long removed from now, you know? And so, just exactly as you say, I think, gosh, how lucky are people to walk through this world and not recognize and realize or feel the kind of fear and oppression that other people feel based just by virtue of their skin color. And those of us who've never had to experience that because we just happen to be born with white skin, then we have an obligation to make sure that we're using our voice, our platform, our privilege to help amplify the voices of those who get silenced, either in our history books or in the publishing world, etc. To me, that's not political. That's just about being a good human being. And the other thing I will just say about that, and this show has gone, boy, we stopped talking about books and now we're talking about really serious stuff. But the thing that has been a big lesson for me that I have learned is that what's in my heart in terms of race and equality matters a whole lot less than the actions and outcomes that people can see. Because if in my heart I believe everyone should be treated equally and there's absolutely no difference between people regardless of their skin color, if I believe that in my heart, it doesn't matter at all if my policies, my procedures, my actions in the classroom or in the library disproportionately affect people of color in ways that are demeaning or unfair. And we don't have time on this show to unpack all of that, but I think it's time for us to think less about what our heart believes and more about what actually are the outcomes of our work. And even though we might not intentionally mean it that way, if work results in outcomes that are unfavorable or unfair to certain students, then we have to do the work to change that. And when I say our, it can be our personal actions and work. It can just be the personal, it can be the outcomes and actions of our school systems and our laws, et cetera. We have a responsibility to do that. But to bring it back to literacy and books and to Dr. Lesesne, um, building these kinds of reading ladders, especially for not just our kiddos, but for the adults in our lives who may have a gap in their understanding, I think it's an important way to build trust, to fill those gaps, and to also personalize the reading and learning experience for individuals who just may not be ready for certain books that we really want them to read. Sometimes we're not ready for a certain book, but maybe we're ready a few rungs lower. And so if we can start there.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This will be the longest and most serious read this now ever, but I think, Brad, you'll agree, if ever there was a time that warranted it, it is now.
I do. And you and I, when we were planning this, wanted to really intentionally, quote unquote, stay in our lane. Like, we talk about books, we talk about how important literacy is as an empathy builder and just how powerful it is. And like, this was one way, one of many ways that we're just trying to learn and listen and converse and keep this at the front of our radar while trying to help anyone that we can. So
I appreciate that. And that's a good place, I think, to end the show, just by saying that neither Brad nor I pretend or purport to be experts when it comes to equity. We are learning and listening, but trying to use the things that we are experts in to use our lane for good, to try to use the things that are in our wheelhouse to create positive change. And so those of you who are watching, we hope you'll do the same thing. And we hope you'll keep reading, because if there's anything that connects us to one another, it's story. And that's what this show really is all about. So until next week, my friend, happy reading, everyone.
I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.